Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the New Paradigm Navigator podcast. Tonight, I'm here with Lydia. Hi, Lydia.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Good to have you on. We had a little warm up. I needed something to wake me up. Kind of fell asleep, putting my son to sleep. But I'm still quite inspired and electrified from our last weekend, from our last second annual symposium. What about you, Lydia? Are you still moved by it? How was the experience?
I'm so moved by it. I'm now realizing that was during the Sirius Stargate alignment. So it's really beautiful that was co-occurring at that time. And it feels like this high vibrational activation that I've received in my body and in things that are unfolding for me since then, and through connections that were made through that. And yeah, it feels so nourishing and what I call soul food. It's soul food to continue the work and expand the work and just remember and deepen into remembering, for me, what my role is in this new paradigm and in this great awakening. And it feels so good to be received in that and by fellow human beings who have already recognized that. They've raised their hand and they see what's going on, and to be together is very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I had, like, during the symposium, I had kind of two reactions, two sensations. One was just being absolutely blown away. Like, my mind could barely handle it. Like the quality of the content and discussion that was being had, like almost every minute of the symposium, I could barely comprehend. And the second one was more during the end, was just this deep, almost shattering gratitude that's kind of following the first one, but this one I felt more in the heart of, like, it's like crying without tears, like constantly, that state of just like, what the heck is happening? Like, I'm so grateful to be here, and I can barely comprehend this, but this is so powerful, this is so moving, and I'm so glad to be a part of this. So these two were kind of my my sensations that lasted throughout the symposium and a few days afterwards. And maybe just like a bird's eye view for me, just comparing it to the first one, I think the first symposium was kind of like an initiation, or like the theme was, there was a lot of fire theme in it, so we were kind of lighting the fire and opening the space, and that was really magical too. But this, like, second one, I kind of feel like we established something. We weren't just experimenting, we actually, like, it became its own thing. I felt that this is something that, is out there now, something that we can actually offer to the world, and the world can receive.
Totally. And that sense too of, I feel that I could really sense the undercurrent of the symposium as its own living thing, and like collective consciousness. And also it was such a reflection. One thing that's been brewing for me that I've received and will be working on for the next few years is, it's called the Gathering of the Priestesses. And I will be inviting priestesses from different disciplines as well as traditions and backgrounds to spend a week together physically to serve the earth, the waters, our collective consciousness, and seeding this new paradigm and doing the work that priestesses used to do and were so revered for in our ancient cultures all over the world. And this remembrance during the symposium and in experiences that I've been having over the past year of, I don't know about you, but I imagine even in research, right? Oftentimes we research alone, we present alone, even if we're in a symposium or a conference space. And so much of the work is done alone. We may not live, you know, in the priestess tradition. If we're a water priestess, we may not live in a group of water priestesses at this time. We may not live in the temples anymore. And again, in our global society, it's so beautiful that we can be so connected to others who are doing the same work. And so I've realized after decades of doing things alone and walking my path alone, it is so powerful and it is so expansive and quickening. It quickens the process to do it together. And I am so honored to be a part of the New Paradigm Navigators and to have been part of this symposium. And so grateful to have received that clear reflection of just everyone who is meant to be there is there. The beauty that happens when we come together to share our individual gifts and passions and roles in this great awakening is so awesome. It is awe-inspiring.
Yeah, and thank you, Lydia. Thank you so much for sharing yourself and guiding our ritual space during the event. It was absolutely beautiful, and it was like a glue, you know, gluing this all together and opening this I would say like a prayer, you know, into so many more levels rather than just, you know, the head or the intellectual. So first of all, thank you for that. And to riff a bit more on your point too, is that I think that's the beauty of where we are at right now collectively as humanity, that, you know, we still do our deep dives, you know, alone, or the path of the mystic is a lonely one, like they say, you know, but we don't have to be alone in this anymore. We can connect with, like, even if it's like super niche, we can actually find, I don't know, the other 10 or 20 people in the whole wide world, in the global world, who are also interested in that very niche thing, or who have done some work in it. So we can join our forces and start to do the deep dives together. And I think this is what the symposium was about too.
Totally. And it's such a privilege to learn from people in different disciplines and fields of, right, in the instance of the symposium and New Paradigm Navigators, different people's research and academic interests and also heart interests. And that's been something for me in my journey that has always been really clear, is the interdisciplinary and intersectional nature of all of this. The world doesn't operate in philosophy, science, math. It is all overlapping and it all works at once. And when we have and stimulate, right, our minds, especially in an interdisciplinary nature, it's so inspiring to me. It's so fueling, and it's so beautiful to receive everyone's niche expertise and passions, and to notice what that stirs in us and what it, you know, it's like the biodiversity of the Amazon. Everything thrives in diversity.
Yeah, it's so beautiful to witness that, to see that, you know, you can call it whatever, cosmic intelligence or God or guidance or the great plan, to see that, you know, we are born with these very peculiar, let's say, interests. But when you actually, you know, you find this place for yourself, this niche for yourself in the ecology of, you know, in the natural ecology, as well as the societal ecology, as well as the ecology of ideas, if you find that place for yourself, you know, you find your purpose, you find your meaning, and you start to serve it. It's so beautiful. And like you said, you know, to see passionate mathematicians, you know, and really well explaining to us that, you know, this isn't just equations, you know, these beautiful equations, this beautiful architecture, this beautiful art, you can apply this to everything. You can do everything better. Yeah, Shana was explaining that, you know, you might think of this as some kind of an intellectual thing or you know, math, but in her mind, like, if you apply simple principles that they are using in math, you can even apply it to ethics. You know, if you look at simple equations and understand that, okay, if we just started to incorporate this thinking in our, you know, relationships, in our politics, you know, war and all these, you know, tit for tat or win-lose strategies, they don't make sense anymore. They make absolutely zero sense. So that is so inspiring for me.
I feel like it's such a mark of that level of alignment when one sees and lives that their unique service applies to so much and sees those connections. And it also, you know, just for everyone listening, it is such a deep prayer of mine that everyone can know the feeling and live what you and I are talking about. How good it feels to be in your service and your purpose and your joy, and to follow that as it evolves in your lifetime and as it continues, and to know that that is possible, and to know that the systems that so many of us have been born into, we don't need them. And we don't need to, you know, sitting in New York City, we don't need to be in corporate America to survive or thrive. I really feel like thriving looks like this. There's an incredible venture capital investor and so many other things. His name is Naval Ravikant. He's originally from, you know, Naval?
Yeah, a bit.
So one of the core things that he said that I love, and I love people's stories of struggle, and when people have struggled in their lives and made their lives what they want them to be, because it is always and forever going to be an example for me to relate to and to expand more and deepen more into what I dream of for the world and for myself. And Naval, as a businessman, says that there are 9 billion people in this world. One day, his hope and his vision is that there will be 9 billion businesses. And I love that, because it's also the ancient way. Everyone does their little thing. That's their thing, and it works and it serves and it's beautiful. So I feel called to add that to this conversation.
Yeah, and from their soul, you know, this is kind of my topic and what I'm doing for my MSc, that this niche, this expression, you know, it can't be copied. Like I've had this discussion many times with a friend of mine that, you know, in this age of AI, you know, you can kind of copy, you can synthesize, you know, easily, but what you can't copy is your soul. So we need to bring that out. So in a way, like, this technological shift that is happening, it is, you know, pushing us into deeper expressions of ourselves, because less doesn't work anymore, less doesn't serve anymore.
Yeah. I love that.
But
yeah, go ahead, please.
I also want to know how I also want to make one more example, but after that example, I want to hear how you got into this. I want to know how you stumbled upon your path and calling and service. But I just wanted to add to your point that how beautiful and how good it feels to answer your calling or serve your purpose or do what you love. Just like for me, last week when I was preparing for the symposium, my talk, I had this this reminder, this remembrance, this reawakening to that state of being, to that state of mind. I was preparing my presentation, and I was not just in the flow. I was loving what I was doing, and it's so easy to distract yourself like nowadays, and I was trying at one point. I was trying to distract myself, just to like maybe out of habit, maybe also just to give myself a bit of rest, because I was working a lot with my mind and for hours and hours. So I was trying to take a break, and I was looking at something, I was reading at something, and like 5 minutes in, I'm like, I can't. This shit is so boring. I fucking can't stop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
closed the other tabs and just resumed working,
Yes. Yes, 100%. And it's so, for me, I'm curious if you've had this experience. I've had this experience where friends and people in my life have asked me, in no way do I mean to brag when I share this, but like, how do I live such a conscious life? How do I choose, like you said, not to be distracted and not to be watching shows all the time, and how do I have the energy to read so much and to do my work and not go out and not go to clubs and not do what normal 20-year-olds are doing. And it's so easy because I know what I love, just like you shared. It's like you can't go back, and when you're going back, and it just doesn't feel right. And I think it's all of those things have always been, the more conscious I became, the more I was aware of like why I was doing them and what they meant. And the more I learned how to tend to my emotions as sacred messengers, the more I was able to discern all of that which wasn't in alignment in my life. And it's so, I just had an experience this Friday night. One of my brother's friends, who's a great comedian, and I love supporting his work and celebrating him, was having a show out here in Brooklyn. And in the excitement, I like whipped my partner and I up to get ready and go see his show. And we sat down and we had a little bit of time. And I started reading one of my Mary Magdalene books as I'm about to present at this conference. And so like doing my research and doing my work. And I just had this moment of like, I'd rather be researching, I'd rather be doing the work. And I so am in support of him. I'm glad that I heard that he had a great show. And that's just what's so true for me. And I think that that's the beauty of really knowing what's true for each of us.
Yeah, that's, and it's so great to realize that, and like this was a really special moment for me. Like you hear these actual good influencers or business people like almost cringing when people are asking like, but how do I keep my discipline, and how many hours should I put in, and they'd be cringing like, hey man, like until you find that thing you can't keep yourself away from, you're doing the wrong thing. Different variations of that. Like if you find that thing you should be doing, like this won't ever be a questions like where, like discipline or how many hours should I put in, you won't be able to keep yourself from it. And thanks to that realization, I'm also viewing people in a different angle now, you know, successful people, business people, you know, most of them, you know, you were talking about the venture capitalists now are advocates, like they are doing it, and I can't speak for them, but as much as I've seen that, you know, they're either doing this out of mission or they're doing it out of passion. And the second one, like, you know, at that point you don't care for money. If you've already made 10 successful businesses, after that money doesn't matter. You're doing it for the feeling, you're doing it for the thrill of doing it. And you know, if you love doing whatever, just business is example this time, if you love doing business, then you will get better. Like, no, you know, if you keep doing the thing you love, you will get better. Doesn't matter what it is, you will just outlast everyone. So,
and I think that's also the piece too of twofold. One of the things that I have come to in my personal spiritual practice and my path is just what you said, that passion has always been something, even since I was a kid, that's been a part of me and very important to me. And I don't know, when we talk about pleasure and tantra in my training and practice, and specifically like the neo-tantra of sexuality, like the importance of pleasure in both spiritual practice and also life, and what the access for me in accessing and knowing the sacredness of my sexuality and the sacredness of my pleasure, whether it's in a sexual experience or in the joy of making a mandala or reading a book, being connected to that flavor, which, right, when we look historically, we've been disconnected from, most of us in one way or another, our ancestors. And it is an experience, a frequency that has been problematized and we have disconnected from in one way or another, most of us. And so when we look at the other ways, it looks to be connected to passion and pleasure and that frequency in life and work and interests and hobbies. That's also just such a key too of finding what it is we're interested in and figuring out those clues. And if we don't feel that feeling, it's also a communication, right? Of like, what might I be interested in? What might I be passionate about? What might pique my curiosity? I think one of the things that I've really come to understand, which an artist, Sam Lewis, that I had on my podcast, really like brought to the forefront of my consciousness for me, is curiosity is the key. Curiosity is always going to lead us to something on our path. And it's that level of following curiosity. And I know that, you know, in the American school system, it's not what we're trained to do. It's not supported, maybe not until higher education, when you might have an opportunity to research something or do an independent study, or but just that practice too of, as an adult, continuing to find that curiosity and follow that thread of passion. And if we don't even remember passion in our body, to connect to the passion when we make love with someone and the sacredness of that and that experience, and figuring out how to cultivate that even with ourselves in the self-pleasure practice of what it looks like to bring more of that frequency into our life, because quantumly we know that that will attract more of that as well.
Yeah, this is like, here are so many threads of
Yes.
where this conversation could and should go, because before, even like outside of record, we were talking about priestesses and Mary Magdalene, and the big topic for me, like even in my thesis right now, I'm researching soul. So I would
Yes.
say, like, if you want to like overwhelm yourself, like just take this topic. It's basically the whole human enterprise is accessed through that word. But just going through like different historic interpretations, I'm looking at the Western ones right now,
Right.
and realizing that, you know, like even if the experiences for the people haven't been dry, like that the discussion is so dry, like it's, you know, either like scriptural, like trying to trace it through Bible, or philosophical, you know, talking about the Greeks, talking about Plato and Aristotle and all of them. I mean, I like it, it's still cool, but it's so dry, it's so boring. And in that sense, like the Indian, the tantric perspective, all the immanent and all the, you know, indigenous perspectives are so much more like resonant with me, you know, brimming with life.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that. Let's come back to that.
Can I add too, just to
Yes,
like
please.
put a pin in it, that I feel that because I feel they're alive. And I've always said, I had this epiphany during COVID. The philosophers of our times are not philosophers. They are not in academic philosophy. Maybe they are, maybe they have tenure and they're finally writing what they want to talk about. But the Platos of our time are not in academia. I don't believe. I believe they're living. And they're through their living, they're transmitting and sharing what they're learning through their living. And it doesn't mean that we have to put someone then on a pedestal. But yeah, that sensation of living transmissions, living wisdom, living experiences, as access to soul and the divine. And I wanted to share this with you too, of your presentation, which I loved. The fact that you use soul is so beautiful. And I had in my research apprenticeship work this fall. No, I guess it was the spring. Time is an illusion. That I just had this thought once when we were talking about spirituality and some of this in the work that Dr. Lisa Miller does around what she calls awakened awareness as an intervention, a psychology intervention. I said, what if we called it, instead of spirituality, what if we called it soulfulness? Because in America, the soul tradition, a typically sort of Black jazz soul, it's alive, it's living, so much there. And so I wondered, just loosely and in my journal from that conversation, I put a pin in that. And when you brought that back up, when you brought that back up for me in what you shared, and some of the conversations that evolved from it. So I just, yeah, I see you.
I would love to. I would love to experience and witness their worship. Yeah, I've heard great things about it. And yeah, like even in my research, like soulfulness or this aliveness is a quality that has come up in my interviews when I talk about soul. Like, you know, the word soul, it's like outside of religious like circle, it's almost lost its meaning. Like it almost means anything. I've also realized. But one thing that does come up is also like these elevated experiences and this like charged awareness and these very like intimate and vulnerable
Mhm.
kind of states of being.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, soulfulness is a good word. I'd like to, yeah, I resonate with that.
Yeah.
But it's like a wild horse, our episode. So
For
let
sure.
me let me try to tame it.
Okay.
Just to have a little handle. Like, how did you come
Mm.
upon um this field and your path and I don't know, spirituality maybe, in the widest sense.
Sure. I'm happy we can meet the wild horse. We can let it introduce itself. Um, yeah, so the short of my journey has been um I when I was a kid, I had a very I still don't quite know how to describe it other than I knew very clearly in my body and remembered very clearly how powerful we are and how much we're capable of, and that I could do anything in my life that I wanted to do. All I had to do was choose. Um, and slowly, through a lot of factors, but I really think school was a big piece of it for me too. Slowly, that was forgotten and doubted. So a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
journey was coming back to that knowing and reconnecting with that knowing. I was
Disenchantment,
raised, pardon?
disenchantment, and re-enchantment.
Disenchantment. Yeah. I also, something that I've reconnected with over the past, yeah, half a decade or so is that I saw. I was a seer as a kid and I could see things and sense things that were not validated. And so that loss of enchantment in multiple ways and in ways that were very confusing for me as a kid, um, and invalidated. Um, I was raised Roman Catholic, and when I was 12, I found Buddhism in like a paragraph in a textbook of our world explorations class at school. And I was able to use an open research paper at that time, and I chose to research Buddhism. And everything I read about it was everything I knew to be true, that we could liberate ourselves and that we were our own solutions in a way. And then I continued down that path every opportunity I got, for the rest of my secondary education, middle school and high school. Spirituality, also was doing yoga when I started when I was 14. Never really thought of it as spirituality. Also never thought of the tradition of yoga or Buddhism as a religion, which obviously was the beginning of the spiritual thread for me. And then I studied philosophy when I was in undergrad as the thing where it's funny, we had read Buddhist philosophy in my freshman year of my undergraduate studies, and it still didn't click to me that I would have wanted to study philosophy. It was when I was in Rome studying abroad. My professor introduced me to Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and even Kant's categorical imperative, which for anyone that listening doesn't know, I don't blame you. And the categorical imperative is essentially act as if what you do, you would will for everyone else to do, which is beautiful and powerful.
Mm.
And between all that, I realized this is what's missing in society. We need this. We need to live this again. Because to me, these are all not rules for life, but as the philosopher writing, this is what I have found to be true. And, you know, the classical philosophy question of what is a good life and how do we live a good life, and also society. And then at that time, I was beginning to study quantum physics, consciousness, and spirituality, and what, you know, at the time was still woo-woo. All of the esoteric and mystical traditions and practices, which culminated in my version of my thesis that I spoke on. Very similar topic to Vushti in my own way, of the intersection of consciousness, quantum physics, and spirituality at a philosophy conference in my undergrad. And that definitely paved my academic path in this way. And then I started to, at the same time, I had been in therapy doing my own healing work, and had met someone at a rooftop bar in Manhattan who pulled me aside and said that she told me things about my past that obviously she could not have known. And she told me that my energy was very dark. And one of my favorite compliments that I ever receive is that I am like sunlight. And so my ego was very offended by this and very confused and very pissed off. And it was the beginning of me, after being in therapy as a teenager and young adult, realizing I cannot outsource my healing to anyone, to a therapist, to a medium, to anyone. And I took radical responsibility for my healing and my well-being and my evolution in that way. I graduated university during COVID and ended up working for 2 years on a download that I had received to create a platform where people could access philosophy, psychology in very bite-sized pieces that would be like why people might go on social media, except I had stopped using social media personally when I was a senior in high school, so when I was 18, because I could see what was happening before any of these documentaries that have come out since that show us what these products do to our brains and to our well-being. Worked on that for a long time, and at the same time was deepening my healing and my practices, training as a yoga teacher. And I came to a point where I realized, after I was in the city at a friend's house who runs an incredible app called Yoni Circle, which is a digital platform for women's circles, that she has venture capital investors. And we were just hanging out for cacao and tarot, and it was a Saturday and she had to work, and she had to, you know, ask me to hang out for a second while she hung out and dealt with that and had to work. And I just realized I don't want that. I don't want to, it's not for me. So I paused my business as I had been developing it and pitching it, and sort of surrendered. And it was a beautiful lesson in, I have no idea what I can do. I'm going to teach yoga and see what evolves from this. And my entire life evolved from that, and everything I do now. I was working with a coach at the time, and she asked me to share my dreams for my life. And all of my vision boards, all of my logical plans just went out the window. And the only thing I said was priestess. And I had read a little bit about, I'd read one book about, I think it's called The Way of the Priestess. And it's not even anything I know about priestesshood right now. It was really powerful at the time that I read it, but it wouldn't have planted any idea, an image of what I do now into my brain. And it was my soul. And it was my soul that finally had space to guide me And I was finally in surrender enough to say, whatever you give me, I will do and I will try. And everything just evolved from there. And every opportunity began to open up and began to present itself. And I'm trying to think of what, how to bridge that into, as I began to open and I began to open to what is possible and what is real, and began to remember that I saw things and that I have a special connection, and it's not because I'm special, but because we all have extrasensory perception abilities. And I began to reconnect with those. And Magdalene came into my experience when it's so funny. I was reading the Magdalene manuscript, which is like a common initiation into who Magdalene might be. It's a channeled text for anyone that's interested, that talks about the person who wrote it was channeling Magdalene, and she shared that her lineage and tradition comes out of Egypt and the cult of Isis. And there's evidence to suggest that that is possible. And I love that. I love that there is archaeological symbolic evidence of the ways that ancient Sumerian and Babylonian, and thus then Egyptian, images and symbols of the left-handed path, the feminine path, a sort of Egyptian tantra, then evolved into a Christian mysticism and different religions. And so I was reading this book in my bed. I remember this, and I have salt lamps on at night, and I had my salt lamp on at night, and all of a sudden I saw and could sense this figure standing next to my bed, and I just knew that it was Mary Magdalene. And I completely freaked out, because that was my experience as a child, is anything that I sensed that wasn't supposed to be there was immediately terrifying. And in the years since then, I've realized that that's probably what a lot of people felt like when they experienced what, texts and traditions would call angels or other entities, is this fear of God, fear of what was happening. But my therapist at the time, bless her soul, I remember I came in and I was still like a little shy about it. And I was like, she's going to think I'm batshit crazy for what I'm about to tell her. And like, this is a therapist, so I don't know like what I should really tell her and what I can be incriminated for in therapy jail. And she was like, Lydia, the next time this happens, I encourage you to get curious about who is there and what you're experiencing. And the next time it happened, I came back to her and I was like, I tried to get curious, and it was very scary still. But it was just that beautiful invitation that was a part of opening me up to what has always been my path. And the deeper my work has gone, the more it just evolves and has shown me that, for me, what Mary Magdalene looks like when I look back at my path is, it makes, to me, I know why I was born into the Roman Catholic Church. I understand that I had to know what felt wrong in my body, not to demonize anyone's religion, but what felt wrong for me. And to learn that this essential and feminine part of a history had been likely explicitly written out and reveals to us an image of sacred union and love and what had already been missing for likely thousands of years as patriarchy started to rise in that area long before the time of Yeshua, Jesus, and Magdalene. But so that led me on a deepening into my path in my work and priestesshood in terms of returning this right of especially women. Like women's empowerment has been a piece of my journey in ways that, you know, I look back and it's like, wow, I understand why I did that and why I was drawn to that, even if it's not the same thing that I'm doing now, what that felt like and what that was leading me towards, and why it's important that women come back to their power and their spiritual power and their spiritual connection and awaken their wombs and connect with their wombs and connect with this portal embodied to the cosmos, the source. So yeah,
Yes,
that's the short.
you have so organically already answered like many of the questions and the places I wanted to go, and you know, we can just deepen from here on out.
Yeah.
When you were talking about it, I actually remembered that I have read the manuscript of Magdalene. This channeled book. It's not a big book. I really liked it. I was pretty young then too, I think. 19 maybe, or even younger.
Wow.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
did you remember? What did it stir up in you as you read it?
Back then I was about to transition from my book reading period to my like practice and hands-on spirituality. So for me, like I've come back to that full circle now through Anne Baring. She's good. She talks about it a lot, and she's tracing also the whole Mary Magdalene and Christianity, let's say tampering and the loss of the feminine, like throughout history with actual documents and texts and events, and it's amazing. I want to like take a deep dive. I haven't like I have only scratched the surface so far. So in that sense, like right now, I'm even more into like the historical context of how this current matrix has been fabricated consciously, how the veils have been planted and so on. But back then it was anecdotal for me, and I was more interested in the actual Egyptian tantric practices that were included in the book. And shortly afterwards I went into my bioenergetics training, which was monumental for me. But I wanted to say, I want to go more into the priestess topic. I want you to share more regarding that. But I wanted to also add a pin in the word or theme of curiosity, to the importance of letting our curiosity guide us, and like from my own personal life, it's less now because I think I'm more involved in life, but back then when I was more also constrained by the system in schools and so on, whenever I ask the question what if, like the most like natural way I would ask what if, and then something, the craziest shit would happen. Like my life would take the craziest turns. Like I noticed that. So I think that's also another like moment of curiosity, but like the importance of it, like Jung, like in his ideas, and you were talking about Jung before too, that his idea is that the higher self, or the totality of us, which could be our soul in my vocabulary, is guiding us through our curiosity. You know, why certain things attract us and others do not. Like there's a billion things we could take interest in. Why are we taking interest in these concrete topics, these concrete questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think it speaks to, and we can put a pin in Jung too, because there's some interesting stuff
I
I've
would love
learned
to
through
put, I'd love
yeah.
to put pins and all
We just
kinds
have to
of child
remember what's
projects.
been pinned.
Jung.
But that's the piece, right? Is like, in terms of exactly what you said, is this overarching guidance of our soul and why are we interested? It's, to me, it's the same thing as synchronicity, right? Of all the things that we could be interested in, of all the things that we could choose to do in a day, let's stick with curiosity. I think curiosity and passion, because I think those are always doorways to our soul and to why our soul is here, and what we want, and what resonates for us is this is my favorite phrase, you can't make it up. You cannot make it up. And there's no what's the word that I'm looking for? Probability for why you would choose what you choose and why it patterns out over your life or something. Like for me, and I love too what you said about the Magdalene manuscript being at a moment of shifting from reading into practice. I feel like that was a really big awakening for me, and why I study Tantra now is because of what that awoke in a remembrance in me, and what part of my priestess work now is, and will be for the rest of my life, is the cultivation of the temple in which our body is our pathway to the divine. And it might look like many different practices from many different traditions, but it is the reconnecting of each person who comes to practice with me. That communion to me is communing with yourself and the divine. And maybe it's a really difficult practice that brings you to your shadow, and in a really difficult energy that's stuck in your body that you move through and alchemize and learn from in the practice. Maybe it turns into you sitting with the dakinis and Buddha and being in full bliss for the entirety of your practice. Whatever it leads you to, for me, it's the fact that it comes from nothing but you. And I deeply respect psychedelics. I'm so grateful for the renaissance they are having right now and how much they can help. And I feel it is so important that people have experiences and feel for themselves that they can do this just with their bodies, just with and it's not just, it's with your body and with everything you already have. It can be literally just through your breath. And or through connecting to heart consciousness, womb consciousness, lingam consciousness, pussy consciousness, all of these different living consciousnesses in our bodies, and the codes that they carry that we have not even just scratched, but ancient ancestors and lineages deeply know. And I was talking to Vyushti about this yesterday, because we were talking about Tantra, and I was asking her what her opinion is with Westerners studying it and practicing it. And I think it's a really important conversation to always be having and asking for me. And one of the things that we got into, I think Vyushti asked me, why do I like the system or systems of Tantra that I've been exposed to, because there are so many of them. And it applies to the same reason why I've always been attracted to yoga. And I think Buddhism is because these systems and philosophies are created from experiences in the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
looking back, maybe, right? This is me saying this, not a system. I did this, and this posture. It created this outcome. This, and this adds up to this. And I experienced it. And I'm seeing that I can recreate that experience for other people. And so that's deeply a part of the priestess path to me, is for me to get to re-empower and be in that living energy and entity and commune with it in and through myself and facilitate that for others. And that is radically liberating, radically paradigm shifting, and it's the same work as, and why my nature work is a part of my priestesshood, is because the same thing can happen when we're in nature and when we connect with other living entities, fellow living beings in nature and with the trees or other animals or plants. And these are all things that we once had connections with, and I think is such a beautiful remembrance that all of our ancestors have their own indigenous traditions. And especially in the West, especially in American and European tradition, we have been so severed from that for thousands of years. And some places less than others. Some places got to hold on to that more. And for me, priestesshood is about remembrance and serving the remembrance and awakening of that experience and that knowing. And that's a deeply the same left-handed path of Christianity. It's the path of Magdalene and Yeshua that would have been, in short, what some people call a tantric union. It would have been an embodied experience of what was being taught between them. And one of the things that yeah, go ahead.
I'd love to have a trialogue with you and Vishti and go exactly into that. Maybe I'm not ready for this. Maybe the universe, is keeping this from me, but
you can sacredly hold the masculine container for us to do our thing. Oh my God. Please.
Yeah.
Please. Yes. Yeah. So that's, the priestesshood and that's part of, did I say this when we were recording or when we were not recording about the gathering of the priestesses? Remember?
I think you said it before, so I would love to hear that on record too.
For sure. So one of the things that I'm working with now that I've received as a download is called the Gathering of the Priestesses, where I will call, invite, and bring together the high priestesses of different traditions, practices, disciplines to spend a week together in person to serve the waters, serve the earth, serve our collective consciousness, seed prayers and intentions, because that is so powerful and powerful to do together. And it clicked for me from an image that was AI generated. I don't have my phone with me, but I can share it and you can put it in the show notes. And it was an image of these 3 women who looked like high priestesses holding a glowing sort of flower, each of them in their hands. And I just felt into this watery priestess energy that they were offering these prayers in service of the waters and the connection. So one of the things that's really cool, that is such an intersection with science, is a water priestess or a water priestess practice might look like using crystals or praying either to a body of water or a bottle of water and offering energies. So I might, staring at the East River in front of Manhattan, I might sit at the water's edge of the East River and pray to it and pray for whatever I'm offering the energies of to the people that will be touched by this water. And what we know, frozen and science, water holds memory. And we see that in that study of the snowflakes. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
Okay. I highly recommend to anyone listening who hasn't looked this up, if you look up snowflake emotion study, you will see the pictures of how water holds memory. And so this is an ancient practice that women, priestesses, used to do, maidens of the well. This is a very like English and tradition from the UK. And so that just came back to me in this image and this power of, wow, to be together, to do this work, to offer our knowing and our experience completely in service of the new earth and what is possible for our future, and holding that and giving that to the earth to be held in a frequency is so powerful and exciting. And that's what I am here for. And it's an exciting honor and privilege to get to come into these things. And I want to emphasize, one of the things I realized in this past literal week is, with other doors that have opened in this same vein for me and my service and work, is that when I stepped into this path, I had no idea what it looked like. And I had no idea, I had no image of it being real or realistic, or what you could do with it, how you could make money with it, all of these pieces that hold so many of us back. And I think for the priestesses, when we have very few living images of that tradition across traditions, outside of a system, it's so beautiful. And I'm so grateful and baffled, and my inner child is so in awe that it's happening. And I don't think it's a coincidence for my personal journey that it's happening with me now too, like collaborating with the outside world and with very important things that are being planned to continue to bring the priestesses and the oracles of Delphi back, is that I chose it when I had no idea what it looked like, and I had no realistic image of what that would look like in the world outside of my little bubble of occupying that honor. So I think that that's also been a really important realization that I've had. That I wonder if you feel, Remo, in your path, the choosing of your path and what you felt and knew was true for you before you had an image or an understanding of what that might look like
Just as
and
you are
interact with in the world.
Just as you are sharing, so there's like one image, one picture that has been on my wall the longest. Not here, I'm in a friend's house. I would love to show it, but don't have it at hand right now. Is an image of three men, kind of like a little bit kung fu or something, like martial artists with like really long dark hair, standing on pillars, like almost in the sky during a sunset, and they are like watering the earth. They're holding their hands like this, and water is streaming down their hands. Like there's no water source. They're almost like conjuring the water. Yeah. And like this has been on my wall. I haven't even like, you know, like articulated it too much. Yeah. But I feel that like it speaks to me. Yeah. You know, this, you were talking of blessing of waters, but I think that for me is blessing the earth, blessing life, you know, nourishing life itself through water. So that's maybe a synchronicity, if you will. Totally. But another thing I wanted to, I resonated with was when you were sharing about the experiential side of spirituality and the embodied spirituality. Well, there's many things to say there, but one of my like kind of what I wanted to share in my presentation too, and maybe managed to share it a bit, is that today, especially, we can construct our own faith through our experiences.
Oh.
Like you were sharing, and there might be psychedelics in them, there might not. I think just a side note on psychedelics is that they're great to expand your awareness. They're great to shake off like really rigid patterns, ego, outlook, perspectives, whatever. They're really good at shattering that, like just blowing the box away. But at the same time, every psychedelic, every substance, every outside force has a certain bandwidth. They're great at taking you there, but not further than that. And they also lock you in there unless you're really good at controlling your consciousness and state. Going so like you were saying, we can go there in those bandwidths without those substances too. But when we go there with our own energy, with our own consciousness and awareness and will and practice, we can go to other places too. We aren't limited by these bandwidths. Doesn't matter if it's, I don't know, shrooms or acid or whatever. But anyways, one of my core points of my, I would say, brand that I want to bring out here, that I want to anchor into this kind of reality and then time and place, is that we can construct these things. We don't need to read it from a book. Books can be helpful, we can be acquainted with the times, with spirits of great giants of the past, or eras gone by, or civilizations even, or practices, or whole religions, and they can be very insightful and powerful, but it's so much more. It can be so much more intimate, our faith.
Yes. What's coming up for me as you share this, and what my womb got so excited, is that what is true and what has been true will always be true. And it is the living truth and a living transmission that we can connect to. No one holds that key over us. And there may be people that we meet in our lives that have practices we don't have, that they can teach us how to connect with that truth more. And that's ultimately, I think, when we know, for me, that's how I know a teacher for me, is because they're about to hand me and teach me more embodied practices to connect to that stream of truth more. And for me, then when I look back at the priestesses and the traditions that we know about of ancient Sumeria and Babylon, I see the same things that I'm connecting with now. I see the same things in another tradition and in another tradition. And that's what Aldous Huxley is talking about, the perennial philosophy. That's what so many people are trying to touch on. And I think it's just that exciting nature of the living truth that cannot be withheld when we have these practices and when we have sovereignty over our minds and our bodies. And I think, to the psychedelic piece, one of the things I talk to about this, and my partner is in psychedelic research and psychedelic training, we talk about, for me, what I've realized in my experience with psychedelics and my experience with deep embodied spiritual practice and ancient traditions, is that holding those practices and traditions creates a completely different experience when we may choose to use a plant ally or work with a plant ally. And I think it's so important. Nothing will ever replace, to me, the embodied practice and system we create for ourselves within our own body and our own knowing, because it just radically alters and creates a level of sovereignty and autonomy and
trust.
and a non-dependence, because we can always get dependent on that and on even the practices we know and we've been exposed to. And I think that that's what's always such a joy for me, is there's always more practices to learn. There's always a deepening. There's always like just scratching the surface through what I can access and touch. And that's so exciting, and it's so beautiful to begin to understand what our human ancestors have known and touched on, and is ready to be integrated, remembered and integrated into the technologies and sciences and things that we have today, that when combined, right, talking about a new paradigm, when combined, that's a radically different world to me. And it's a radically empowered, at the individual level, that creates more harmony and well-being. One of the interesting things I went into my master's program with, in terms of questions I was asking for my thesis, was, because I know my lane of service, my question was, when our psyche is well and, let's say, healthy enough, then what happens when we do these practices?
Mm-hmm.
Then what do we access?
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like for the goal of psychology, to be aiming for? Let's get these psyches well enough to integrate these practices. And then what happens when people are having mystical experiences every day? What happens
when it's not about healing anymore? What happens after healing?
And there's always so much, right, to heal, and it'll always come up. And there's always energies in our bodies, that in our energetic bodies, that can get stuck and unprocessed, and is a part of that journey too, and a part of this deepening of, one of my favorite things, one of my teachers, Silva Pinto, has taught me, is that it's, when a lesson comes back around that we might have thought we worked out, like she was using the example of abundance. It doesn't mean we didn't learn the lesson, and it doesn't mean we didn't do the work and heal something that was blocking a level of abundance that we're having. But it means, great, I get to deepen into this more. I get to understand what a next level of this is. And it's such a beautiful reminder too of as my teacher Layla Martin talks about this, as cycles of pleasure and purification. And the deeper we go into our purification, the deeper we go into our pleasure, and it will always continue to cycle. And we can grow used to those cycles, and we can have tools, and we cannot be swept away in them. And it can all be a portal to God. That is the foundation of why I resonate with Tantra, is that everything is the divine, and everything is a portal to the divine. In and through every experience.
Thank you for sharing that.
Are there any pins that you want to pick up on?
There's a lot of resonance. No, I'm feeling this introductory episode is coming to a close. But I guess, and again, like you're this is always a good sign, a sign of a good talk for me, when my questions are being answered before I can actually ask my question.
Totally.
Okay, I will ask it in a more philosophical way. Again, you kind of answered it, like what's guiding you. But I will make it a bit more philosophical and maybe tie it back to the theme of visions of the new paradigm. And I might want to share one more point too. Okay, I'll share the point and then I'll ask the question. One thing I wanted to share, like I shared on the individual level that, you know, we can construct our own faith, and you know, it's just so pertinent to me right now that as I'm going through the topic of soul and the kind of historical unfolding of how people have understood it and what they have thought about it, and again going back to the Western kind of dry notions, kind of biblical derivations of it, though still very important and very interesting. There are many interesting notions there, but not only are we able to construct our faith, you know, personally through experience, through embodied wisdom, and you know, even synchronicities, curiosities, passion. I think that today, especially today, in the past too, but especially today, we can do that on a collective level too, because it's one thing to read the Bible, you know, to read the Vedas or Upanishads or whatever you have, but the totally other thing to talk to a person who maybe a few days ago, a few months ago, a few years ago, doesn't matter, went through a near death experience, out of body experience. We just had a fucking heroic dose of I don't know, acid or DMT or 5-MeO DMT. You know, I'm not sure about the past, but I'm quite certain we didn't have the level of access to people's experience we have today. So in that sense, like I think this like experience, you could call me a phenomenologist, you know, because of that, but I think people's experience speaks so much louder than any books could.
Yes.
And thanks to that, we can actually, like, this is what transpersonal psychology is about. We can actually look at people's experience, the glimpses people have of the afterworld, the lives between lives, the subtle worlds, you know, the living archetypes. And what I loved about your sharing was the aliveness. Like, this is coming more and more to me as well, that, you know, truth, you know, all these realities, beauty, the spiritual truths, gods, you know, they, when we think about them, like especially in the West, with Western mind, they're like snapshots. They're like frozen snapshots of the actual living thing. You know, they're killed and dissected. Like, this is how our mind is wired. We don't see the living thing, but the real thing, the real spiritual, you know, entity, whatever it is, it's alive. It's as much, if not more, alive than we are here in our bodies, breathing, experiencing. You know, the consciousness, even the term consciousness, it's so dry. It's like a thing, but it's the opposite of a thing. It's the ability to sense the subject itself. You know, so that's kind of a footnote I wanted to leave. But the question, let's get to the question too, is, you know, what the visions of a new paradigm, how do you see, like, what, you know, what the fuck is this about? Lydia, what's this about for you? What you doing here?
What am I doing here? Well, first, Remo, I'd love to just, so thank you for what you shared. And I really yeah, that living stream, what is living in and through me and in and through you, and what we also livingly co-create together as a collective consciousness, and all of these different realms of dimensions of experience. It's so what I think is really beautiful, one of the things I love that Dr. Lisa Miller has taught me is that we did a practice once in one of her classes. We were talking about, I think it was synchronicity. And she brought us through meditation to experience and remember synchronicity that had been deeply moving to us. And we did some journaling about it. She brought us back into meditation and she said, now, what does this tell you about the nature of reality? And it was just that deep, potent, personal, expansive, epistemological sense of what is my experience teaching me and revealing to me, and it is valuable. And it is just as valuable as me reading Newton's law of gravity. And so what's guiding me is twofold. One, what I know in my heart to be true for what this world can be, and how incredible and lucky we are that we live on this amazing planet. One of my favorite things to do is to paddleboard, and I don't go to exercise or to have a very like intense experience unless I really want that. I paddle out as far as I can out off the coast, and I just lay down on my board, and I am as intimate with the water as I can possibly be. And I just watch the water and I watch the sky, and it always turns into a mystical experience of, I cannot believe that I am floating on a rock in space that has the perfect atmosphere for me to exist in. And there are clouds and this ocean exists and there are all these living beings below me that I don't even know and that I can't even experience. And that's just one dimension of what's happening here. And I know that peace is possible. I know that harmony is possible. I know that we can live in a world of justice and equality and heaven on earth. That is what guides me. And I don't think that it is unrealistic. And it may not happen in my lifetime. It may not happen in 1,000 of my lifetimes. And maybe the experiment ends before that's possible. But I believe that that's what we're all here for and what we're all here to realize together. And the other piece of what personally drives me is the ever unfolding clues and mysteries and deepening of why I am here and why I came to Earth at this time and what I'm to be doing here on my path as a priestess in the 21st century, and getting to ever remember and ever experience the beauty of watching a bird fly across the river or connecting with fairies in a garden is deeply why I am here, and the joy of connecting with other humans like you and people that don't think like us is what guides me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond.
It's such a joy for me to connect with you. So precious.
I could do this all day. I live for this.
Same.
On my podcast, we don't do limits. I will go for 2 hours. I don't. Yeah. I respect the limit. We got to work within the boundaries of time and space when it serves. But yeah, I could keep going. It's amazing. It's such a joy to let what wants to unfold. So thank you for holding this space and for inviting me here, and such a pleasure to share just the surface.
Yeah, let's definitely continue this, whether on your podcast or this one, and do the trialogue with Vishti.
Yes.
There's things to look forward to, but thank you so much, whoever was with us and will be with us. Wow, what a thrill. We just finished Babylon with quite a new movie, Babylon, with my partner, and I really love the saying. It has stuck with us. Ain't life grand? Let's end with that.
Yes.
Ain't life grand?
Bless.
Bless you all.